Hi Jordan, I'm Bob. You've been a great help to me over the past few years, and I'd like to see if I could return the favor, in particular in the area of metaphysics. I'd like to talk about the concept of non-duality. But first, before I get to that, I want to talk about transcendent experiences. You've mentioned them before in your lectures, how they help people stop smoking, no longer fear death. There's many ways that people can have them, from meditation to psychedelic use or epileptic seizures. There's all kinds of ways, near-death experiences. But I've never heard you mention what it is. And I'd like to see if I can address that by talking a little bit about my experience. In my experience, I saw the chaotic depths, the infinite blackness. And in that blackness, there was an infinite amount of the eyes of awareness. There's just eyes everywhere. There's one other thing down there, and that was a dragon, a particular dragon, one that you know quite well. And this is actually why I'm reaching out to you. The dragon I saw was the Ouroboros. So what is non-duality? Well, it means not two. So we live in a world of dualities where there's me and there's you and there's the camera and there's carpet and a wall and all kinds of things around us, objects. Non-duality is the idea that there isn't really those things. They are all just one thing. Now, that's very strange, but I'd like to use a little bit of metaphor in order to talk a little bit more about this subject. In this experience that I had, I was the Ouroboros, and not only that, so was everything else. There was no separation between myself and the self of everything else, and not just humans, but all of creation, all of the universe. So how can I explain this a little bit better? To put it in straightforward terms as best I can, consciousness is primary. Consciousness is one. We each have our own in our heads, but the thing animating them all is one single consciousness. You might call this consciousness God or awareness. In the Eastern traditions, I believe they call it Brahman. But there's many words for this one singular consciousness. Our reality, then, is very much like a dream of this consciousness. It is, yes, very physical to us as we experience it in duality, but from the point of view of that consciousness, it is a dream. It is very much as though we go to sleep at night, and a reality springs into being in our minds overnight. So our experience is to this consciousness like a dream is to us. Well, what does that mean then? The things that we are made out of, the things that we call matter, is actually the stuff of that one consciousness' mind. Just like the matter in your own dream is the stuff of your mind. It exists and it behaves like matter in your dream, but when you wake up it disappears. Now the difference between our dreams and this one consciousness is that it doesn't really wake from this dream, at least as far as I'm aware. It hasn't for billions of years anyways. It doesn't look like it's planning to anytime soon, but that's kind of just the edge of where the analogy can go. There is a lot of interesting and old principles that support this. There's the hermeneutic principles, for example, as above, so below. We also see a lot of the symbols, mythology, kind of point in this general direction, at least as far as I have been able to interpret it, especially after having this experience. It all kind of snapped together and made sense. I had brought up the idea of the eye of awareness, and on the back of the dollar bill, it floats above a pyramid. And the rest of the pyramid represents humanity. Well, an experience like this, one of these transcendent experiences, merges those two things back together. It's no longer the top of the pyramid floating above the rest of it. It is a complete pyramid, and all of it is part of that eye, part of that structure. It's the same thing. That gap in between on the dollar bill, that is the ego, for lack of a better word. And so when you have an ego death experience, when that disappears, the top comes and settles back down, and you see everything from that one thing, and it is all one again. So what are the consequences of thinking this way? And how do we know that it's not just loony thinking? Because obviously it sounds like it. Well, I think if you follow the thread of this thinking, you will find it in all the world's major religions. And in fact, I believe that's actually the defining line between what is a religion and what is a cult. A religion will have this idea at its root somewhere. It's probably obscured a lot, but it's in there. And the religion as taught through some of the texts will always point to that idea, even though any individual practitioner of the religion or any individual teacher may have never had one of these experiences and might teach in an alternate direction. Anyways, back to the consequences. Nietzsche was right. God is dead. At least all the dualistic ones. If God is something that sits someplace else and wound up a clock and let it go, and our reality is something separate from God, then absolutely, God is 100% dead. But I don't believe that to be the case anymore. It seems as though God animates everything very intimately, day by day. It also means, though, that materialism is dead. Everything is a ship of Theseus. There's connections between everything. We just tend to not notice it and obscure that because objects are handy to deal with. And in fact, they work quite well for this dream that we live in. So I think it is necessary, in fact, that we maintain our egos and use them appropriately, because that is exactly what we should be doing in this dream. However, we can't lose sight of the fact that we are still all one, and when we engage with each other on a human level, we should be behaving as though we are both divine, because I believe that is how it is. We are all made of the stuff of God's mind. So what do you gain in return? Well, there is the resolution of some paradoxes. For example, the problem of evil. The problem of evil is only there if you have a God that does something and is separate from creation and lets it go, and maybe he creates its creation to, murder itself and all this sort of horrible nonsense. But with this way of looking at it, it is God actually doing the same thing to God. It is one God in many forms, even the most depraved forms. The difference, though, is not that there's this lack of recognition in the forms that they are indeed God, and that is why they behave that way. But there's also this idea that, yes, while we may experience what we believe to be suffering down here, since we are all God, and God in the non-dual sense can't be hurt and can't suffer, suffering in the non-dual sense also does not exist. So it resolves some of those problems. It's a little bit awkward, but if you delve into this a lot, it makes a lot more sense than I can explain fully in words. The other thing that you get out of this is that you no longer see just the humanity in other people. You also see the potential and indeed the reality of their divinity, and you begin treating them like such. This is a wondrous, loving dance with God having the opportunity to love God in other forms, and it changes your outlook on how you should treat other people. There's another thing that you had brought up before, and that is that when people have these experiences, they tend to be the most real thing that they've ever experienced. And I would have to concur. If our knowledge about the universe as we know it is something that is gained through experience, this is the most real experience that I've ever had. If we're going to then attach truth to that and say, well, what is the most true things we know, then by that measure, this is also the most true thing that I know. Anyways, I hope this message finds you. I hope it maybe sheds a little bit light on your search through the metaphysical, and maybe I'll post something else later. Thank you for your time.